Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's race C is Daytona Group 3, and you know that means there's going to be one crazy meta car that's way too fast, but luckily, one of the old meta cars is now the anti-meta car. Let's get into it. The anti-meta car of the week is the Peugeot VGT, which means that everyone that's not an American gets to laugh at how I pronounce Peugeot. This car is pretty much only useful for races that involve incredibly high speed, so luckily we've got Daytona, and this thing can definitely beat the Viper. While it doesn't accelerate or handle like the Viper, it can definitely pass it on the straight, which really does matter here at Daytona. I managed to get a 145.2, but I think a 145 flat is possible. Igor Fraga himself set the fastest time in one of these, and I set one just a little bit slower, and as you can see, the Viper is absolutely dominant here. Some Supras and McLarens are also in the top 100, but this thing is better. As our friend Boxy mentioned a few weeks ago, it's very important to sacrifice everything in the hopes that you can get the most amount of momentum and speed going into your first flying lap, and the best way to do that is to just take off from the bus stop and then ride the highest possible line right here. Of course, you don't want to hit the wall, and it is actually pretty tough to not hit the wall with this car because the rear quarter panels are so incredibly wide that if you use the digital tachometer like I do, then you're going to find yourself too close to that wall, so be very careful with the width of this car. You want to cut down so you go across the start-finish line towards the inside, then track out looking for this black light here on the fence, and after that is this white line on the ground, and after that is when you hit the brakes. You'll notice the dark line where the tire marks are left on the track, and I pretty much try to follow that into the corner. Braking with full pressure until about third gear, you're going to see these lines right here, and about then is when I start trail braking in. I try to make it a goal of getting down to first gear before I get to this change in pavement. Gradually adding steering as I slowly come off the brakes, you'll notice that I'm going to come entirely off the brakes and then add even more steering as I pass the tire barrier on the inside. Back up to second gear before getting on the throttle and make sure that you unwind the steering just gently as the car accelerates, because if you continue steering, you might spin out. As you pass the pit exit barrier, you want to make sure you actually cross over the pit line. It's not going to give you a penalty. Your braking point is actually going to be this tiny dot on the pavement, but I want you to make sure that you know where that is in relation to this light post here on the left, as well as this number 1 sign on the infield. If you're following someone, you will not be able to see where that dot is, so it's important to know approximately where it is based on your surroundings. Brake down to second quickly and start turning in as you pass the cone on the infield right there. You'll be trail braking in a little bit as you downshift to first gear, but most of the trail braking is going to come after that, and you're going to come entirely off the brakes, add more steering, and back up to second gear before fully getting on the throttle. The car will have low power at this point, but that's going to be good because it's going to allow you to get fully on the throttle without worrying about the car sliding out. If the car does start to slide out, you've got to correct it very quickly. Move to the right, being wary of how wide your car is. Don't touch the grass, hit that curb, and then set up for this next braking zone. Once again, there's a tiny mark on the pavement for your precise braking during time trials, but it's important to know where it is in relation to the access road there on the left. Once again, you're going to brake heavily down to second gear before then starting to trail brake in. You're going to gradually release the brake as you add more steering, getting to first gear before you hit the apex, and of course adding a lot of steering before then going up to second gear and getting fully on the throttle. I like to completely avoid the inside curb because it's very easy to make it slide. Make sure you're not steering a lot as you go on the exit curb too, because that can also make you slide. Once again, and for the final time, we're going to look for a mark on the middle of the pavement. It's these two lines right here, and it's important again to know where they are in relation to this access road here on the right. Brake hard down to second gear, and you're going to wait to turn in until you get to the end of the yellow bits on the right. You want to trail brake really quickly, getting down to first gear and then back up to second gear before getting on the throttle, being very careful about how much it bumps and how tight this corner is. You want to make this the widest arc possible. If you start to slide out, you can countersteer really quickly, but it's probably going to make you understeer into the wall, so it's best to be very gentle on the throttle and avoid any kind of oversteer in the first place. For whatever reason, it used to actually be faster if you put your inside tires on that yellow line, but it's actually much slower now, so I like to completely avoid it. It might look like I'm really far away from it, but it's because this car is so incredibly wide in the rear. Leading to the bus stop chicane, you'll start seeing number boards on the fence to the right, and before the number 1 board, you're going to see this white line on the ground, and that is when you brake. I like to downshift to fourth really quickly and ride the brake as I trail brake, trying to get half of my car to stay on the yellow part of the curb right here. As I come off the curb, I'm going to change directions, and as I'm moving the steering wheel to the middle and then to the right, you'll see that I'm adding and then subtracting brake again. After trail braking to stay on the yellow part of the curb right here, you're going to notice that I turn the car and wait for it to rotate before then getting fully on the throttle. You've got to make sure the car rotates before you give it all that throttle. For the exit, you need both of your right tires on the yellow part. You cannot go much beyond that, and if you do, you're just going to give yourself a penalty, and it's probably actually going to be slower as well. Anytime you touch the grass on the bus stop, it's also going to slow this car down and make it spin out, so be very careful when you go beyond the yellow parts of the curb. Once again, you want to avoid touching that yellow line, and just because we have so much time to talk about it, I want to mention that you do not need to rev this car out. If you rev it much beyond when it starts flashing, then it's going to actually slow your car down. You don't need to rev this thing way out. At the end, to save 1/1000th of a second, you can then just turn in a little bit and make most of your car go beyond the yellow line, but it's not going to save you that much time. It's very important to carry a lot of speed through this corner, and one way that you can do that is making sure that you downshift to first gear so you can keep the car decelerating as you come off the brakes and add more steering at the end. When you do get on the throttle, you want it to be in one smooth motion, just like all of these exits. There's so few turns here and so many places that you need to be fully on the throttle that your exits, just getting on that throttle and staying on the throttle, are going to be very, very important. The best way to do that, like I've been saying, is to add a lot of steering after you come entirely off the brakes, get the car to rotate, point it where you want, and really get on that throttle heavily and in one motion. For this corner, you'll notice I didn't shift beyond 4th gear, and for this next one, you're going to notice I don't shift beyond 3rd gear. Anytime you can eliminate the need to add a downshift, you're actually going to be spending more time decelerating rather than losing time with your downshifts. This left turn onto the oval itself is probably the hardest corner besides the bus stop for me. You'll notice that I went all the way up to the wall, and you'll probably see a lot of the faster people doing that. It's not really important to stay close to the inside. Even if you do add a little bit of distance by tracking all the way out to the wall, you can save a lot of momentum. You can carry a lot of momentum, I should say, and go a lot faster if you go all the way out to the wall. For the bus stop, you want to carry as much momentum in as you possibly can, and you want to get to the slowest point right before you turn in and then add throttle. If you treat it like it's a single move rather than, I guess, 3 or 4 different corners, then you can carry a lot more speed. You got to decelerate in, accelerate out in as few moves as you possibly can. Once again, I do want to point out you do not need to rev this car out, and in fact, if you rev this car out beyond the rev line, then it's actually going to slow it down, and of course, you can use a little trick of turning in just a little bit at the end. It seems like every single time we get a new Bape, we're eventually given a chance to race the Group 3 cars at Daytona. It's always really fun to see which cars are going to be the new high-speed kings, and usually it's pretty predictable, and it wasn't that much different this time. I was kind of surprised to see the Viper as the meta, but I wasn't super surprised. It is an American car at an American track with an absolutely massive engine, and it's known for having a ton of power, but the Viper hasn't really been that great since probably GT Sport. Strategy-wise, you are required to take a pit stop, but you're not required to do anything at the pit stop, and I would not suggest taking tires unless you absolutely have to. And I know some of you controller drivers are going to want to take tires, but I can also tell you that there are a lot of controller drivers who are not taking tires. I think you should do whatever you can to avoid taking tires, because the most important thing is actually not getting away from traffic, but staying with traffic. Since this is a slipstream race, and since custom slipstream is on, it's very important to stay with a pack, or at the very least one person that you trust that you can slipstream with, because the people in the lead are definitely going to be bump drafting, and if you're not bump drafting, you're not going to go as fast as them. It's impossible. By now, you probably know what bump drafting is and how to utilize the slipstream. I assume you do if you're watching my videos, but if you don't, we'll break it down just a little bit. Slipstream is when you're following a car and they're essentially punching a hole in the air for you so you have less wind resistance. Bump drafting is when you use that extra speed from using the slipstream of the car in front of you to then gently push them so they can in turn go even faster, and then you in turn go even faster than that. If you can possibly coordinate this with any of your friends, then a group of you can bump draft each other, not pull off any moves on each other, and not threaten to pull off any kind of moves, so you can all just drive together, going much faster than is even possible by yourself. Now, this is a part of the strategy I don't think I've actually talked about in a long time. If you are a veteran of my series, if you've been here for a while, then you know I've talked about this. I think it's very important to make friends with the people that you race with. If you race in this game a lot, then you probably end up racing with some of the same people, and hopefully you haven't made too many enemies. Hopefully you found more friends, and those friends can really come in handy in times like this. If you're able to agree with your friends what your strategy is going to be based on where you are before the race, then of course you're going to be able to find some great success. But you can even do the same thing if you don't get to really communicate with these people. If you simply choose to bump draft someone rather than pass them, you can give them the signal that you are willing to work with them. Now, as they say, all is fair in love and war, and just because you gave someone a bump draft and just because they gave you a bump draft, it doesn't mean that you absolutely have to sacrifice your position for them or vice versa. In fact, there are a lot of times where I bump drafted someone the entire race only to pass them on the final corner. That's just racing. Because the slipstream is so important, it's also important not to make passes on certain corners. There are definitely places where I would absolutely not make a pass. For instance, if you are going faster than someone and you're leading onto the oval itself, if you pass before you get there, it's going to slow both of you down just before the most important corner, where it's very important to go as fast as you possibly can and get on that throttle as early as you possibly can. And in fact, if doing so makes it so neither of you have the slipstream of the pack in front of you, you've essentially lost the race. The pass I just made was a pass of opportunity, and I knew that because we were on the infield, I was going to be able to catch up with, or at least stay with, the people who were directly in front of us, and then it wouldn't really be an issue going on to the oval. This corner right here, it's very important to have slipstream with people in front of you, as well as not try to make moves before. Essentially, no matter how fast you are at the infield, there's nothing you can do against someone who is slipstreaming with someone else and bump drafting with someone else on this long full throttle section. Unless they make a huge mistake costing them maybe a full second, you're just not going to see him again. This is why it's also very important to not get penalties, because if you're at the very back of a slipstream train and you get yourself a penalty, you're no longer going to be in that slipstream train and your race is over. Haha. Now, lucky for me, someone that I very much trust and love racing with, Bacon Slayers, was far enough behind that I was going to be able to potentially stay in his slipstream, even though I have to serve this penalty right here. Just like in other races, if you can find yourself out of traffic and you can then work with someone, then you can find yourself going much faster than all the people who are battling with each other, even if they are slipstreaming. So on one hand, you've got to be with people that you trust so you can bump draft and slipstream with, but on the other hand, you've got to be away from the people who are going to battle a lot. So it's kind of a tough puzzle to figure out, but again, that is kind of the fun part about racing. I'd actually lucked out so much that so many people were battling up ahead that it slowed the entire pack down, and I didn't even have to wait for Slayers to get to me to then have slipstream in front. But luckily, because all that happened, I had slipstream in front and Slayers had the slipstream behind me. Another aspect of the strategy that I don't always talk about is car knowledge. It's very important to know what the cars around you are capable of so you can make decisions on the fly. The Supra ahead is very fast in a straight, but it's not quite as fast as it used to be, and it's not great on tires anymore. On top of that, it's also very difficult to drive. Behind me, Slayers is in the Aston Martin V12 Vantage, and despite the fact that the thing can handle incredibly well, it can brake really deep, it's amazing in the infield, it has absolutely nothing to offer when it comes to the high speed, so it is entirely reliant on a much faster car, or pretty much anyone else in front of them to provide slipstream. A little bit more info about the custom slip. The custom slip is used to avoid the dirty air problems that we have in a lot of these races. Group 3 has really bad dirty air when it comes to trying to follow people close. In fact, it's worse than real life according to some people, but because of that, it makes the slipstream unrealistically powerful. The benefit to that is pretty much any car in this class can work as long as you can stay in slipstream. But it also means that people who may or may not be nearly as fast as you can stick with you. And a lot of times these people are the kinds of people who would make iffy moves, so you've got to be really careful with who's behind you in this slipstream. You may have noticed I used my blinker to indicate that I was going into the pits just to let Slayers know that I was going to do that. And with just myself and Slayers, we should be able to, if we're able to stay super clean, go faster than that pack ahead because everyone else was battling. Now, like I've said before, it's important to try to make friends if you can, but I know that's difficult, so just using your signals can indicate to people that you're going to go in the pits, and hopefully you can get people to follow you. Now, not everyone is going to want to play ball with you, not everyone's going to want to do that, but it's worth trying. I didn't realize that Lowy had gone in the pits super early. I think he probably went in on the second or third lap, and he was just lapping by himself. Now, that is a really good strategy if we're in the type of race where it's not slipstream dependent, but because it is slipstream dependent and he's not in one of the cars that has incredible top speed, it wasn't really going to work out for him. However, since Lowy was just about 1 second ahead, it definitely meant that Slayers and I were going to be able to work together and then get his slipstream, and barring any kind of unforeseen circumstances, we should be able to use that to go even faster than we would be able to without Lowy there. Now, usually I jump ahead until there is some actual action, but I want to show you how powerful it is when Slayers can give me the bump draft on top of how fast this car is. We were 1.2 seconds behind Lowy. Slayers bumped me, and now once we got into Lowy's slipstream, before we get to the bus stop, I think we're going to probably be down to 0.6 of a second, approximately. Just like I thought, 0.6 behind Lowy now. Just because Slayers bumped me and because this car is so incredibly fast, we got to Lowy's slipstream, and with all of that stuff combined, it really shrunk down the lead that Lowy had in front of me. Lowy got a much better exit out of the bus stop, however, and increased that lead to about a half second, but I do want to show how incredibly powerful this car is against the Aston Martin specifically, and how easy it was to get in front of him way before the next braking zone. You can see Slayers, despite the fact that he had slipped the entire time, is still not even able to catch Lowy himself. With all that said, however, I do also want to show how incredibly good the Aston Martin is on the infield, because despite the fact that I didn't make too much of a mistake until I hit that grass, they were already leading up to me, and leading into the next corner, he's already on my tail. Because our friend Damien Canadian knew exactly what we were planning to do, he went into the pits completely by himself, knowing that he'd be able to get right in front of us and we could all work together. It wasn't until the end of that lap that I was actually able to catch up to Damien and give him a bump draft, but it's also important to note that both of the guys in the Aston Martin right behind were able to stick with me despite the fact that this car is much faster, and that extra speed was magnified by the fact that I did have slipstream from an equally fast car. Now, this isn't going to be a perfect example of what you can do when it comes to just driving by yourself, because like I said, Damien and myself and Slayers had been planning on working together before this race. But if you can convince someone to do this with you, or if you can just signal to them non-verbally that you want to work with them, then you can have this exact same kind of effect. Our job now is to just not bother each other, make sure that we stay close but not too close, avoid hitting each other in the corners, and then just using the slipstream and the bump drafting the entire time until the very end, when we can then battle each other. I unfortunately made a very embarrassing mistake going onto the oval, and Slayers had no choice but to pass me. He actually had not planned on doing so, but it would have been silly just to let the slipstream disappear, so he went ahead and slotted in front, and as you can see, it's not actually that bad. Despite the fact that that car has absolutely no top end on its own, because I was able to give him the bump draft, and then Lowy behind gave me the bump draft, and then I bumped him again, we were able to stay fully within Damien's slipstream. The reason I made that mistake is something that I think you guys should also watch out for. It's the overspeed when using the slipstream. Because the slipstream is so strong, you're going to be going a lot faster than you might anticipate when it comes to the braking zone, so you've got to brake much earlier. This is a skill that you've got to learn on your own, and you can really only do it by practice. A lot of people will just time it and they'll brake a little bit earlier than their normal braking zone. A lot of people will just lift off the throttle so they're going a little bit slower, and they can react to the brake lights in front and then slam on the brakes when they do see the brake lights. There's a combination of things that you can do, but either way, it is a skill that you're only going to get by practicing, so practice as much as you can while you have this opportunity. Now, with Clubsport pace, we had not actually talked to him whatsoever before the race, but since we all know that he's fast enough and we know that we can trust him to be a clean driver as well, it's not a hard choice to make the decision to just bump draft him as well, especially considering the fact that we're at a position where if Damien were to pass him now, he would probably just lose the position leading into the first corner. So you definitely have to choose exactly when you want to pass people, even if the right opportunity arises. At the beginning of lap 8, I made yet another mistake, and Lowy was able to pass me on the infield and luckily stay within the slipstream range of the two ahead. Now, despite the fact that the Aston Martin is much faster on the infield, this is how much faster the Pug is on the straight, which is what's really important for this race. There's absolutely no amount of technique that can make up for the lack of power that most of the cars have against the Metacar and, of course, this car, my anti-Metacar. Now, if you recall, the entire plan was to pit early and then use calculated slipstream and bump drafting to avoid any kind of traffic and overtakes and slowdowns that being with the group would provide, and it seems to have worked pretty well. When we first went into the pits, we were 2.6 seconds behind the leader, and now I am only 1.1 second behind the leader. And the people in front of me that I've been working with are even closer, which means they're within slipstream range, and that means that I am also within slipstream range, because that effect does trail all the way back to the entire pack. The funniest thing about all of this is the person who is currently in front, the person who had the pole position, the person leading on the final lap is most likely not going to be the person who wins the race. The Viper is incredibly fast on its own, but of course with the custom slipstream there's nothing you can do when someone has slipstream behind you, especially if it's another one of the meta cars, or something that may or may not actually be even faster. One thing to consider when you're in the slipstream is that the longer that you're in it, the more momentum you're going to gain from it. The more speed you're going to have, the longer you can stay in it. So if you're slightly further behind the person in front of you than they are to the person in front of them, you're actually going to have even more speed. And if you can time it just right, you may have an advantage over someone who has the same amount of slipstream or a similar amount of slipstream. Out of the bus stop, you can pretty reliably see the person in second place try to make a move on the person in first place. And of course, everyone behind is going to be jockeying for position as well. Damien tried to pass both of the Vipers, and he was just about to, but I had the slipstream from Slayers and then had the slipstream from Damien. And because of all of that, because of the position I was in, I won. And it was so ridiculous, and I'm actually going to show you the live clip of it from the stream. That is so funny. I could not have asked for a better finish, and to showcase exactly why I chose this as the anti-meta car. It's definitely not as good as the Viper in general, but under slipstream conditions, which is what this race is, at least 90% of this race, it is absolutely incredible versus the meta car. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll be leaving you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you.